way too much for TikTok.
Hei, jeg er Anne-Pia Lystrup. Jeg er regionsansvarlig i Rio. I dag så er jeg på Nordic Reform Conference i regi av Foreningen Tryggere Ruspolitikk. Det er en internasjonal konferanse med fokus på nordiske problemstillinger på rusfeltet. Så her samles fagfolk, aktivister, sånne som oss, og for å lære nye ting om rusfeltet, og for å komme sammen og prøve å skape endring.
And whether politicians should maybe reintroduce it or legalize it.
This was a speculative packaging for legal cocaine.
So tell me, who are you and why are you at the Nordic Reform Conference?
Hi, my name's Steve Rolls. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst for the Transform Drug Policy Foundation in the UK. We do policy analysis and advocacy around drug policy and law reform with a particular focus on modelling what a post-prohibition world looks like. So not just critiquing the war on drugs, but modelling what comes after the war on drugs, including the legalisation and regulation of all drugs. And I've been coming to this conference for a few years. I actually was at the first one of these Nordic Reform conferences. It's a brilliant conference. It's always amazingly organised. This organisation, the Association for Safer Drug Policies, is doing fantastic work in Norway and around the world. And I'm very delighted to be contributing to that debate with the expertise that we have in our organisation and our contacts and our experience on the international stage, and talking about what's happening in the UK, or in many cases what's not happening in the UK.
Has anything you've learned today made an extra impact on you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been very striking listening to the speakers today. The eloquence of the critique of the failings of prohibition, the war on drugs, the punitive paradigm, whatever you want to call it. There was an amazing speaker from Sweden talking about the impacts of Sweden's particularly punitive drug policy. Within the European context, Sweden are kind of particularly bad in terms of fighting this punitive war on drugs and punishing people who use drugs. And you know, he presented the outcomes from the last 20 years or more, going back to 1988 actually. And they were all terrible. You know, the whole point of this was to try and create a drug-free society. And all the trends in Sweden have gone in the opposite direction. And then we've also seen harms from punishment and incarceration and costs and burden costs on the criminal justice system. And yet all the outcomes in terms of health and drug use and drug-related deaths have been terrible. You know, Sweden has within Europe, Sweden has, I think, maybe the second highest drug-related death rate, I'm ashamed to say, after the United Kingdom. So that was really fascinating. There was a brilliant speaker talking about the impacts of cannabis enforcement in Norway, talking about the trauma of people who have to encounter criminal justice enforcement and policing, how they are often traumatized, how their drug use often increases, how they feel a sense of shame, PTSD. I mean, I was very struck by that. But there were also, more positively, there were also some really useful contributions on how we can begin to address some of the problems associated with drug use, particularly around addiction. So there was a really good speaker talking about what effective prevention looks like. And prevention is often, amongst drug law reform people, seen as a bit of a dirty word, but actually prevention is important. We don't want young people and children using drugs, particularly high-risk drug-using behaviours. And it can impose costs on their families, on wider society, in the workplace. And it's important to try and prevent particularly harmful and high-risk drug use. And there was another really fascinating talk about treatment. You know, how do we can talk about treatment as this just good thing? Of course, we shouldn't punish people with drug problems. We should treat them. But how do we get that right? What does good treatment look like? What does it mean? How do we address the complexities of this whole spectrum of different risk behaviours of people associated with drugs? So I personally found it really, really fascinating, and I do find it inspiring to come to Norway and see this dynamic debate taking place, led by civil society. You know, this isn't something that politicians are leading. It's organisations, small non-government organisations, are informing and driving this debate forward in a really, really positive way. And actually, Norway is showing real, I think, thought leadership within the Nordic region, but also within Europe and the wider world. So for me, it's very inspiring. It's a very inspiring conference, and I'm really, really pleased to be here.
It's a really good and long answer.
Oh, sorry.